But do you know what today is? Today is a very special day in our history. Chris, are you with us?
I am certainly here. Go ahead and
do you know what
tell us
today
what
is?
today is.
Do you know what today is? Today, something happened today that saved our nation. Does anybody know what that is?
Oh, no. You have to prep me before.
Okay, this is today is August. It was August 1776. John Glover's Marbleheaders evacuated Washington's army across the East River to Manhattan in a nighttime operation that saved them from being trapped on their fortified trenches in Brooklyn Heights. On the night,
that was the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. That's when they prayed in the midst of a hot summer day.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, a fog came in, divided the British from the Americans, gave them time to get on the river and escape, or else they were going to be annihilated by the British.
Now, can you imagine this? The Marbleheaders evacuated 9,500 men during the night, horses, artillery, all their stores, almost all their stores, and nearly all their artillery, and saved Washington's army for another time. That was amazing. So, anyways, we're going to start out with this: faith, F-I-I-T-H. Fear ain't in this house, and that's what I want everybody to realize. Fear is not in this house. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is from me, saith the Lord. It's Isaiah 54:17. And I have Chris Marola with me. Chris and I have been working on some things together, well, I haven't included Gina in on the loop here yet, but we're going to be doing some things together with. We'll announce that later. How's that, Chris?
Yeah. You got to wait until everything falls into place. Concerning the prophecy or the promise of Isaiah 54:17, or any promise for that matter, those promises are for believers who have a covenant relationship with God through Jesus. Those promises given to the Old Testament Jewish people, Israel, are carried over to the New Testament for those who are believers in Christ, because he suffered and bled on the cross for them, and that's what we call the blood covenant relationship. So that's interesting. Now, what it reminds me of, John, is that this country, and many people don't know this because it's no longer being taught, and there are many people who don't want it to be taught. 92% of our founding fathers were Christians. And while they did not want to force a state religion on this country, they saw how terrible that worked in Europe. Both the Anglican Church in England, was united with the state along with the Catholic Church in Rome, and the state and the church were one. That was a bad situation. So the true meaning of separation of church and state is there's two separate entities, government and state. They cannot be the same, but people of faith are more than welcome to become part of the government. However, what we've seen in recent years, over the last 120 or so years, is a group of people called the progressives. They essentially were socialists from Europe who came to the U.S., and they promoted an idea that separation of church and state doesn't mean two separate entities and people of faith have a right to be in government. They preach the idea that people of faith have no business in government, and that has commonly become the phrase or the meaning of separation of church and state. That's what we're told today.
Well, I spoke to you about this, and I wanted to make sure that we got this message through, because that's right. Because the progressive movement came from Europe, it filtered into our colleges. I have that correct? Am I getting that right?
Yeah. See, here's what happened. It goes back to the French Revolution. Because the church and state were one, both in the Catholic Church through the Roman Catholic Church and through the Anglican Church in England, people did a lot of oppressive things, government officials, in the name of God. But to them, God and Christianity wasn't spiritual. It was actually political. And a lot of terrible things happened. And so people began to get turned off by God and religion because they associated the abuse of government, who used the name Christian, even though they weren't truly Christians. They associated that with bad and with evil. So during the French Revolution, they threw anything to do with God away. And that revolution was the complete opposite of the American Revolution, where the American Revolution, 92% were Christians. And the founding fathers were Christians. They did not want to force a state religion on anyone, but they did want biblical principles, not biblical rituals, biblical principles to build our country around. Because if the government forces you to take place or take part in a biblical ritual, then they're violating the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. But it's not a violation of the Establishment Clause to have biblical principles built into our government. I'll name some of them for you right now. In the Bill of Rights, the 6th, the 7th, and the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, 5, 6, 7, and 8, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, and 8th Amendments of our Constitution deal with due process of rights, meaning you're innocent until proven guilty, you have a right to go to court to have your case heard, you have a right to cross-examine those who are accusing you, and you have a right to present evidence proving you're innocent, or defending yourself as innocent. All of that comes from the Old Testament. That comes from the old Mosaic law. Due process of rights and due process of law comes into the world after the parting of the Red Sea, and God hands a moral law, that's the Ten Commandments, to the Jews, and then he gives them civil law. Out of that civil law came due process of law, and the Founding Fathers knew that. The old British system that they were under said you're guilty until proven innocent. They said that's a bad system. We want innocent until proven guilty. And so they took the idea of due process of law, innocent until proven guilty, you can prove your case in court, you can face your accusers. It all comes out of the Old Testament. And those biblical principles, not rituals, but principles, were written into our Constitution. Now, compare that to the French Revolution. It was completely opposite. They were throwing God and the Bible completely overboard, and it was a humanistic revolution. And out of that humanistic revolution came many humanistic thinkers who then influenced people like Lenin and Marx and Mao and all these other, Nietzsche and all these other people. Okay, fast forward to the 1880s. Here in the United States, many wealthy families started sending their kids to Europe for college. And they became indoctrinated with these isms: socialism, Marxism, relativism, nihilism, all these different beliefs, right? That nothing matters, materialism, relativism. So they brought these isms back to the U.S. They became the college professors and the teachers and began teaching it here. By the 1920s, a guy by the name of John Dewey became the so-called educational, revolutionary for education in the public schools. Have you ever heard of John Dewey?
Yes.
Yeah, he's considered to be a hero, the father of the modern public schools. John Dewey was a communist. He was so radical in his beliefs that after he took God and morality out of the public school system and took all the Judeo-Christian principles out of it, okay, he then was hired by the Soviet Union and Communist China to go to those countries and set up public schools in those nations based on what he had done to the United States here in the 20s. This is all, yeah. And he then John Dewey trained materialistic, relativistic, hostile, atheistic. Not every atheist is hostile to the gospel, but these ones were. He trained atheistic people who are hostile to become attorneys and then move through the court system. And then as they got through the court system, then they started issuing rulings that are not constitutional, but they shaped and changed the lives of Americans for good. So this was all done by design. It all came out of that French Revolution because the people were angry with Christianity and God because the monarchies were basically uniting with the churches in England through the Anglican Church, in Rome through the Catholic Church, and evil things were done in the name of God by these governments. And so that led to the French Revolution. Those people indoctrinated people in Europe. American kids got indoctrinated the same way because they went to college there. They brought it back. And people like John Dewey and even Margaret Sanger were part of that progressive movement.
Wow.
Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Margaret Sanger
Chris,
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
we're gonna have to cut you off there because we gotta go. We gotta go to another caller, but we'll start. We can pick that up on another day because we're gonna try to make this a little bit of a segment. All of our shows coming forward. So
Yeah, no worries.
Yep.
He just got to a part I knew about.
Yeah, but we'll move forward with it. We will, and I appreciate you calling in, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
You got it.
Okay,
Good talking to you. Thank you.
You take care. Bye bye.
Wow.